Read by Poe Bronson. What counts is not necessarily the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Part 1. Foundations. A horse never runs so fast as when he has other horses to catch up and outpace. Ovid. Chapter 1. Introduction. Parachutists and ballroom dancers. Scholars didn't get away with these kinds of experiments in the United States. Why the University of Trier's ethics board approved of her experiment, we still don't completely understand. What we do know is that, at some point, Renata Deinzer received her university's blessing. And there she stood, in the middle of a tiny airfield in the Mosel wine region of Germany, facing 16 terrified people she had convinced to go skydiving for the very first time. In a single day, each was going from total novice who had never done anything like this to mastering advanced freefall. Scaring people to death was exactly the point of Deinzer's experiment. She was trying to discover how the body responds to incredible stressors. She wanted to know if there was a biochemical expression of fear to match the frightened expressions she saw before her. Before and after their jumps, Deinzer asked each person to chew a small gauzy sponge and then spit the sponge into a test tube. From these saliva samples, Deinzer could discern exactly how the acute stress of skydiving manifested itself biologically. She could measure the telltale psychoendocrine cocktail of the skydiving rush. 3 to 4 people went up in the small plane each time, buckled into the floor. Their hearts felt as if they'd pound right out of their chests, if not restrained by the straps of their chute packs. In just 5 minutes, the plane reached 10,000 feet in altitude over the drop zone. As nervous as they were, for the greater good of science, none chickened out. As the plane slowed to 100 miles per hour, one by one, they climbed onto the rails and dropped off the trailing edge. They tumbled once, then stabilized in the arch position, their bellies and faces to the earth, free falling at 120 miles per hour. For a long minute, the newborn parachutists felt the extraordinary sensation of hurtling toward the vineyards below. In a first free fall, people can get so scared that they forget to breathe or they hyperventilate, which is a particular concern because at a 10,000-foot altitude, people already start to feel the effects of the reduced oxygen supply, and the air pressure alters how arteries function. If severe enough, this can trigger hypoxia, a condition that results in temporary blindness and impairment in memory and reasoning. The moment of pulling the ripcord to save oneself is sometimes so intense that, for some, they faint just as their canopy opens and remain unconscious for part of the flight down. None of Deinzer's subjects experienced complications, though. Hearing instructions via radio sets in their crash helmets, they were guided toward the landing strip, where most were able to glide in standing up. However, this wasn't a do this once and check it off the bucket list day. Instead, they had to do it again. Deinzer had asked each person to make 3 separate jumps that very day. After they'd landed, they chewed a sponge and waited their turn to go back up. For some, they did all 3 jumps within the span of a single hour. Why did they have to jump 3 times? Deinzer was also interested in whether people habituate to the rush of skydiving. Do you get used to it, such that it doesn't trigger the same degree of blast? Analyzing the jumpers' saliva samples, Deinzer wasn't surprised to learn that they had a huge rush response to the first jump. But with each subsequent jump, the rush was reduced by about a quarter. By just the 3rd jump, there was still a pronounced rush of stress, but on average, it was now only half the first jump's intensity. It was more akin to the stress you get from driving in slow traffic that's making you late. Apparently, hurtling to the earth in a free fall is something you can get acclimated to rather quickly. Now, there are many people who go skydiving frequently and love it. But if repeated skydiving doesn't reliably trigger a massive surge in natural hormones, then what's the ongoing appeal? Stephen Ling is a scholar who studies edge work, a term borrowed from Hunter S. Thompson's description of anarchic human experiences. During the 1980s, Ling was a jump pilot at a local skydiving center. He contrasted what he learned there from skydivers with what he learned later by studying car racers, downhill skiers, combat soldiers, and business entrepreneurs. Ling eventually concluded that the true high of skydiving and other edge work stems from the way skilled performance brings control to a situation most people would regard as uncontrollable. All of the safety rituals used to minimize the danger in situations of extreme risk engender this sense of control. But edge workers' fundamental skills are the ability to avoid being paralyzed by fear and the capacity to focus their attention on the actions necessary for survival. The feeling of self-determination they get from conquering the risks is the real payoff. It's not pure thrill they seek, but the ability to control the environment within a thrilling context. Now let's compare parachuting against ballroom dancing. Hunter S. Thompson would never have described ballroom dancing as edge work. There's nothing anarchic about it. It's not an uncontrollable situation. Death is not a potential outcome. About 280 miles northwest of the previous study, this time near Dortmund, Germany, there was another scholar also interested in the psychoendocrine cocktail induced by vigorous experience. Nicholas Rohleder was himself equipped with sponges to chew. In much the same way as in the skydiving study, he also analyzed results of subjects, comparing practice days and rest days to contest days. But his subjects were ballroom dancers, for the most part couples who'd been doing this for years. They were competing in the Nordheim-Westfalen regional ballroom dance competition. There was no money at stake whatsoever, just bragging rights. Dancers had flown in from all over Europe for the fun. Held on a Saturday, the contest stretched for hours and ran continuously, with only minor breaks for the winners of each preliminary heat to be announced. In the modern category, the men wore white tie and tails, with their hair gelled back. The women were attired in silk and sequined ball gowns with stage makeup. When they heard their number called, each couple joined the others on the dance floor, performed a slow waltz for about 90 seconds, then rushed off for a drink of water and waited to be called again. Next was a tango, then a Viennese waltz, a slow foxtrot, and a quick-step. During the competition, the couples were referred to only by their number. Their names were not used until the final winners were announced at the end of the day. But this anonymity provided little safety. The sense that any mistake in their posture or floorcraft would be seen by the 5 judges was palpable. Every gesture counted. The smoothness with which they stroked their feet across the floor during the foxtrot, the staccato action of their tango, the extension of their ankles and pointing of their toes to enhance their line, the rise and fall of their waltzes. During each round, as well as in the hours prior and after, the couples chewed a sponge. By the end of the night, Rohleder's refrigerator was filled with almost 900 saliva samples. Back at his lab, Rohleder froze and then thawed the saliva samples to prevent mold growth. He spun the saliva samples in a centrifuge at 3,000 RPM, and then, with a pipette, transferred 25 microliters from each dancer's sample onto an assay plate that had been coated with goat anti-rabbit antibodies. He added enzymatic peroxide and anti-serum to each sample, then rinsed away all the free-floating molecules with a phosphate bath. Transformed by the chemicals, the assay plate now glowed eerily. Finally, a luminometer measured the glow strength from each sample, which gave Rollator a precise account of the chemical messengers of stress he was looking for. Just how much stress had the dancers been under? The pressure of ballroom dancing induced a stress rush just as strong as someone's second parachute jump. Many of the ballroom dancers' stress response was every bit as high as a first parachute jump. Don't forget, this was not the dancers' first competition or second. On average, the competitors had been in 131 competitions, and they'd been going to dance contests for 8 years. Yet even with all that experience competing, plus thousands of hours of practice, ballroom dancing was still enormously stressful. Rollator ran the data specifically looking for experience effects. He broke the dancers into 3 groups, sorted by their level of experience. The first group were the dancers who had attended fewer than 80 competitions. Most had just a couple years of experience. The second group had competed more than 80 times, and they had been dancing for a number of years. The third group had been to more than 173 competitions. They were the masters who'd practiced and performed repeatedly for over 10 years. One dancer had been in over 400 competitions. In theory, these were the true experts. According to what science tells us, dancing at that point in their lives should have required very little cognitive control. All the muscle memory should have been driven down into the cerebellum region of their brains, where it was automated. There should have been no worry over forgetting to vary the inside and outside of their feet to create style and line. But that wasn't the case. The intense stress reaction was no different between the 3 groups. The psychoendocrine cocktail didn't lie. The cutthroat world of the ballroom remained terrifying no matter how long they'd been at it. The contestants did not habituate. Even ballroom dancers with over 10 years of a continuous experience might as well have spent that Saturday in northwestern Germany jumping out of an airplane. Why might that be the case? How is it that someone can immediately get used to skydiving, but can never get used to ballroom dancing? Because the real difference between skydiving and dancing isn't defined by the physical environment of the activities. It's not even about the actual jeopardy to life and limb. The real difference was the psychological environment. The expert dancers were in a competition, and the novice parachutists were not. To be more precise, it wasn't the dancing that was stress-inducing. It was being judged. It was winning and losing. Competition is special. It has a danger and excitement all its own. Let's think about what that means in the big picture. The last few years, it has been argued that the secret to success in any activity is accumulating 10 years' worth of deliberate, effortful practice. It's practice that makes you an expert. Stick at it, and you'll have a chance to succeed. As that argument was spread far and wide, we felt that something was missing from the success formula. People aren't judged on how they practice. Practicing is not the same as competing. You can rehearse a speech about how you deserve this job 1,000 times. But how do you respond when you see 30 other people in a waiting room, all vying for your same spot? A broker can have a PhD and 10 years spent studying stock valuation. Will that be enough when a portfolio's lost half its value overnight and the client wants to know why he shouldn't move his account to the other trader down the street? You can pitch 1,000,000 baseballs to your child until he perfects his swing, but wait until he faces a pitcher who wants him to miss. Practicing the piano may develop finger dexterity, but that alone won't remedy the sick, twisting feeling in your stomach the first time you are in front of an audience. To be successful, you have to be able to perform when it counts. You have to be able to handle that pressure. You need to not wilt in the competition. We wanted to know, what makes someone good at that? What the ballroom dancing study tells us is that the stress of competition doesn't go away with experience. Inescapable conclusion is that years and years of practice are not automatically enough. In addition to the deliberate practice, success also depends on how well people compete. It hangs on how well they handle that psychoendocrine stress response, manage it, and even harness it. What we'll learn later in this book is that everyone has that stress response, but we can interpret it differently, which drastically affects our performance. 10 years of practice may make you an expert, but even then, it just gets you in the door. You'll still have to dance against other experts, most of whom have put in their 10 years too. The winner is not the person who practiced more. It's who competes better. It's who lives up to the moment when the band is playing, the lights are bright, and the judges are watching. The same fundamental skills that matter in edge work turn out to matter in any competitive situation. The ability to avoid being paralyzed by fear and the capacity to focus attention. And the truth is, nobody puts in 10 years of experience before he starts competing. The world doesn't work that way. We are all thrown into competitive situations long before we've had enough practice. Our results are still judged. Our fate is still determined by how we do. To survive these trials, we need more than practice. We need competitive fire. This book is an investigation into competitive fire, what it is, and how to get it. Competition makes the world go round. It is the engine of evolution and the foundation of democracy. It prompts innovation, drives global markets, and puts money in the pocket. Still, there are those who have argued that competition is a source of evil. They see competition in terms of destructiveness. They don't believe it's a constructive activity. They assert that competition inherently kills off more pro-social behaviors such as cooperation and respect. First, we think that the assumption that competition is the opposite of cooperation is missing something crucial. To compete, both opponents have to cooperate on the rules. There's a mutual agreement of cooperation that governs the competition. As well, competitions are commonly among teams. Each individual needs to cooperate with team members in order to compete effectively. Healthy competition can't happen without cooperation. In fact, the hormones that drive us to compete are the same hormones that drive us to collaborate. Admittedly, competitions do occasionally bring out the worst in us, but bad behavior is not a long-term strategy for competitive success. Kids don't want to play with the kid who steals all their toys. You don't get repeat customers if you rip people off or make them sick. Bad behavior leads to isolation. No one wants to work with someone he can't trust. Furthermore, competitors who spend their time cheating their way into a victory don't develop the necessary skills to win on their merits. Again, cheating is a short-term strategy. It's not a winner over the long haul. We also think that some of the anti-competition view can be pinned on a vocabulary problem. We don't hesitate to declare that countries have to remain competitive in business and in academics. A corporation that is not competitive is behind economically, but it is also failing in its duty to shareholders and employees alike. Season ticket holders of sports teams have an unquestioned right to complain when their local team isn't competitive. Their teams don't have to win every time, but they have to at least push their opponents and never fail to give their all. It's when the word competitive is applied to individuals that the connotation gets murky. Competitive is a compliment when describing Magic Johnson on the basketball court and in his real estate empire. but it's probably a warning sign when depicting a girlfriend's behavior during a casual night of board games. We need to make a distinction between adaptive competitiveness and maladaptive competitiveness. Adaptive competitiveness is characterized by perseverance and determination to rise to the challenge, but it's bounded by an abiding respect for the rules. It's the ability to feel genuine satisfaction in having put in a worthy effort even if you lose. People with adaptive competitiveness don't have to be the best at everything. They only strive to be the best in the domain they train for. They might be perfectionists at work, but they don't care if they're the worst at tennis and shuffleboard. They're able to defer gratification, meaning they accept that it can take a long time to improve. Healthy competitiveness is marked by constant striving for excellence, but not desperate concerns over rank. It's adaptive competitiveness that leads to the great, heroic performances that inspire us all. The maladaptive variety is what gives competitiveness its bad name. Maladaptive competitiveness is characterized by psychological insecurity and displaced urges. It's the individual who can't accept that losing is part of competing. It's the person who competes when others around him are not competing. He has to be the best at everything, and he can't stop comparing himself to others, even when the competition is over. He doesn't stop when the whistle blows. He drags others into competitions they don't want to be in by provoking them, and he will resort to cheating when he can't win. It's this maladaptive type of competitiveness that people usually have in mind if they say, "I'm not competitive." They're picturing those who seem desperate to turn even the most innocuous event into blood sport. Those who want to compete for no reason other than as an opportunity to humiliate the other guy. But hypercompetitiveness is the maladaptive aberration. Adaptive competitiveness is that productive agent of change. When you pick and choose your battles, recognizing which are important and which are just a distraction. The adaptive form is our focus for most of this book. But that left us tongue-tied. In the English language, the distinction between the maladaptive and adaptive is ignored by the catch-all, competitiveness. The linguistic workaround is to turn to metaphor and attempt to capture the valor of being a great competitor without the negative aftertaste. We say someone has ice in his veins, killer instinct, nerves of steel, and the heart of a champion. They have a take no prisoners attitude, or are going for broke, or taking the bull by the horns, or giving 110%. They walk the talk, storm the gates, champ at the bit, and gird their loins. Top dogs come out swinging, will it to happen, put their noses to the grindstone, and show up when it counts. Our search for the right word eventually led us to the first culture that truly celebrated competition, the ancient Greeks. The gymnasium, where men trained athletically, was the center of Greek life. Men came together and argued ideas. Through contest and challenge, their ideas evolved. Ancient Greeks played dice, marbles, knucklebones, and checkers, all very seriously. The staged tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides were entrants in government-created dramatic competitions. They held the Olympic Games, Isthmian Games, and Heraea Games for women. The virtue of competing all the time was that it honed a person's mind and body. The ultimate goal was to achieve something the Greeks called aritos. Today, you may see English translations of aritos as excellence. However, that is just a fraction of its true significance. In the Homeric age, to describe someone as having aritos was to say that he had competitive fire. According to historian J.E. Lendon, competition was the outlet for all other virtues: courage, loyalty, trustworthiness. In the heat of battle, someone with aritos had proven himself to be a fearless opponent and brilliant strategist. When tested, he was a leader, masterfully skilled, knowledgeable, and persuasive among his peers. He had metis, a cunning intelligence. He was physically strong, fast on his feet, and agile with a sword. He was brave and steadfast in character. Thus, Aratos, attaining excellence through competition, became the supreme Grecian virtue. Aratos was something that the gods had and mere mortals sought to achieve. Originally, the Olympic Games were a religious festival, a way to demonstrate one's Aratos. Sports were not merely an entertainment or a distraction or a mimicry of war. All the events were said to have been contested first by the gods and heroes of Greek myths. The human competitors were hoping to demonstrate traits associated with the gods. Through the events, the athletes were following the path of the gods to the divine. Competition brought out the best and taught athletes to be their absolute best. It was a chance to show honor and valor among rivals. It was during these contests that you earned kudos for all your glorious deeds. Both Achilles in the Iliad and Odysseus in the Odyssey are heroic figures who honed their Aratos over the duration of the epic poems. In the Iliad, the questions of why we fight, whom we fight for, and how we maintain honor while fighting help define Aratos. Through the endless trials of Odysseus on his route home, the Odyssey portrays sports prowess, endurance, self-control, cunning, and diplomacy as elements of Aratos. The ancient Greeks did not fear that competition bred immoral behavior. They believed that competition taught moral behavior. Only by competing could people come to attain the full nobility of the human spirit. In simplest terms, they learned to fight fair, with honor and mutual respect for opponents. Aratos meant that competing had shaped you into a better person. Competition challenged you to become the best you could be. Some 2,900 years after Homer's time, the modern Olympics were being held in Beijing, China. It was August 11th, 2008, at the Water Cube, China's National Aquatics Center. The French team was favored in the 4x100 meter men's freestyle finals. Going into the race, Alain Bernard had predicted his French team would smash the Americans. The two teams would be racing side by side in lanes 5 and 4. There was also a long history of rivalry between the Americans and Australians, who had also made the finals and would be in lane 3. The Olympics are almost always the highest profile, highest pressure meets of an athlete's career, but in this case, the expectations were stratospheric. There would be a dozen world record holders in the pool, including the entire American team of Michael Phelps, Cullen Jones, Garrett Weber-Gale, and Jason Lezak, as well as Francis Bernard and Frederick Bosquet. World record holder Eamon Sullivan would lead the Australians, while South Africa had reunited its entire freestyle team from the Athens Games, a team that had set a world record time to win the 2004 gold. And the entire sports world was following the storyline of whether Phelps would win 8 gold medals, breaking Mark Spitz's record haul of 7. For Phelps to get to 8, the Americans would have to win this race. The Americans knew that every one of their swimmers would need a perfect race to win. By perfect race, that meant each swimmer would have to record a lifetime personal best during his leg. As expected, the first leg was dominated by Australia's Sullivan, who finished in 47.24 seconds. 2 days later, he would establish a new world record in the solo 100-meter freestyle of 47.05 seconds. Michael Phelps was 0.3 of a second behind, and the French team just behind Phelps. But over the second and third legs, the French overtook the USA and built a body-length lead. The American anchorman was 32-year-old Jason Lezak, the oldest male swimmer at the Olympics. On that final leg, he swam near the lane line, drafting on the wave created by Bernard, who was out in front. Lezak told us, for a 100-meter race, most swimmers will pace themselves somewhat. They're still breathing. In the 50, they're not. He also added, typically, when I go max for 100, I die in the last 10 meters. In the 2004 Olympic solo event in Athens, Lezak had ever so slightly conserved energy in the semifinals and didn't even qualify for the finals. That miscalculation had eaten at him for years. 4 years later, trailing Bernard, he thought, I had to go as hard as I could from the get-go. When he flipped and turned, Lezak was still 3/4 of a body length behind. He peered to his right and saw Bernard ahead of him. Briefly, he abandoned hope. His muscles and lungs hurt intensely. He knew his speed was about to fade. I told myself there was no way I could do this. He was the world record holder. It seemed the USA would be happy if it could even hold on to the silver medal. I told myself just to swim my own race. But the fade he expected didn't happen. He felt strong and told himself so. I got a little confidence back from getting up to his hip, little bit by little bit. And then I thought I actually had a chance. Right at the point where Lezak expected his body to die in the water, the recognition that he had a chance generated a supercharge in his body. I'd never felt it before. Over the last 15 meters, Lezak caught Bernard and took the gold medal by an outstretched arm. It was one of the most exciting relays in history and one of the closest. Fans around the world were stunned by Lezak's time, 46.06 seconds, a second faster than the world record and almost 2 seconds faster than he'd ever swum in a solo race. No matter how his race was dissected, it was still considered the swimming equivalent of a mom lifting up a car to save her trapped child. How did he do it? What caused this phenomenal demonstration of competitive fire? By the time you are done with this book, you will recognize that dozens of factors came together and contributed to that very special 46 seconds. Yes, dozens of factors, each one taking a few hundredths of a second off his time. First and foremost, the tightness of the race was inseparable from the result. Without Bernard to chase, it never could have happened. You'll learn how important it was that the Americans had a fierce rivalry with the other nations in the pool. You'll learn why it was crucial the Americans were underdogs, that Lezak could swim to win, but wouldn't be faulted if he lost, and how this altered his body's physiology. The roaring crowd contributed. Another element in the win was that the Americans had not won the gold medal in the prior 2 Olympics. Their silver in Sydney was considered not second best, but an absolute failure. To win, it was essential that Lezak believed he had a chance, both before the race and at that critical moment when he reached Bernard's hip. There were biological factors in Lezak that made this moment possible. From the gene variation he likely carries that enables him to perform better under intense pressure, to the levels of hormones that were present in him when he was just a gestating fetus in his mother's womb. Other biochemicals kicked in the day before this race, which switched on genes in his cells and altered the production rate of neurotransmitters he'd need on race day. Then there was a surge of hormones the hour before the race, followed by different hormones at the starter's gun, which he would burn up in seconds. You'll learn what happened to his lungs and his blood vessels, to his pain sensitivity and his decision-making and his attentional focus. Then there were team effects. On his own, in the solo final 2 days later, Lezak would finish in a comparatively slow 47.67 seconds. Were there two kinds of people? Those who perform best solo and those who perform their best only on a team? Lezak knew how to compete with his teammates. He'd taken them all aside to talk about the importance of being a team, not four separate individuals. Subliminal cues they gave one another bolstered their confidence and sense of support, which turned on yet other hormones for the collaborative effort. He was doing this for himself, his teammates, and his country, all at once. That Lezak was an unranked sprinter during his teens and early college years, yet kept training, wired him to be persistent and made him refuse to quit on that back leg. It's fair to say that even Lezak's childhood contributed to that moment by forging him into the competitive kid who would one day swim at the Olympics. All his early years playing basketball and water polo with other boys served as a training ground for his competitive psyche. The factors that came together in that pool are at work during almost any great performance. When a singer belts it out on stage, or a student aces the SAT, or a negotiator secures an incredible deal for her company, or a soldier has to survive an ambush, or a chess master reaches the finals of a tournament. Any time that your commitment and ability are challenged by other human beings who are trying to beat you, these same factors are relevant. Over the course of this book, all these factors will be discussed and more. These factors make a difference in all types of competitions, from sporting contests to sales contests, from academic pursuit to creative pursuit, from political ambition to entrepreneurial ambition. As a general rule, the research has found that the Greeks had it right. Most of us do improve in competition. We do naturally rise to the occasion. In fact, everyone in that Beijing pool had done just that. 5 of the 8 teams finished ahead of the world record time. Competition spurs motivation one way or another, whether it's because a competitor wants to win or because a competitor simply doesn't want to come out on the bottom. Even when we are dragged into competitions we'd rather not be in, the fact we are being compared to others triggers our competitive instinct and we try harder. For decades, social science theory has professed that, in competition against others, our motivation is extrinsic, while when we perform an activity on our own, motivation is intrinsic. Thus, the concern is that competition skews people to be extrinsically motivated, and they'll lose touch with their natural intrinsic love for an activity. But it's not really that simple. Some people love to compete. For them, competing makes an activity more fun. A study of distance runners, for instance, reveals that those who compete at the national level for money, medals, and glory have the greatest intrinsic motivation. It's only the intermediate runners who are externally focused. Similarly, ROTC cadets learning to shoot rifles develop more love of it and more respect for their opponents when they are part of a team-based competition than when they are taught to master and excel at rifle shooting without competition. It's even true that competition increases creative motivation. While our society upholds an ideal that creative genius is most prolific when it's untainted and uninfluenced by petty outside forces, such as comparison to others, deadlines, or financial rewards, we conclude quite the opposite. Competition doesn't kill creativity, it facilitates creative output by supplying motivational drive. Competition also teaches people to be comfortable with conflict and opposition, which is a necessary building block for developing the creative psyche. There are a few people who seem comparatively immune to a contest, but they are the exception, not the rule. And for them, there doesn't seem to be a downside to their participation in a competition. It neither hurts nor helps their performance. And there are those whose performances do suffer in competitive environments. They become overwhelmed by the intensity of the event until they emotionally withdraw. What's fascinating is how the science can predict which category you will fall into. And the science also shows how people can improve their performance in competition no matter which of those categories they began in. Success in competition requires taking risks that are normally held back by fear. The first risk is entering the competition itself, choosing to compete. Everyone has his own personal threshold where the benefits of competing outweigh the fears. Those who focus on what they'll win choose to compete far more. Those who focus on their odds of winning choose to compete far less. As humans, we are all driven by a desire to experience pleasure and to avoid pain. But people differ in how much of each they need and can bear. This book describes these two biases as gain-oriented or prevention-oriented. And these biases significantly impact whether people compete or not. You'll also learn that women choose to compete less than men do, but it's not because men are bigger risk takers per se. It's that men tend to be overconfident of their abilities and thus are blind to some of the risk. This gets men into more contests, but it doesn't necessarily help them win. This same decision point, whether to join a contest in the first place, repeats itself in miniature thousands of times during a contest. Every competitor is vulnerable to a tendency to conserve energy. Going all out with total focus is virtually impossible to do continuously. We all constantly calculate whether to continue investing our energy and our hopes in the competition. We constantly keep track of our odds of winning and the expected value return on digging deeper. Again and again, we choose whether to go for it or not. We decide whether to lie back and protect ourselves, or whether to put our egos on the line. Religious scholar James Carse makes a distinction between finite and infinite games. Finite games have a beginning and an ending, with the goal of winning. Between games, there is recuperation and restoration. Infinite games never end, and since no winner is ever declared, the goal instead is to get ahead. With infinite games, there is no end to the comparisons, only a waxing and waning of competitive intensity. It turns out that women handle infinite competitions better than men, often because they find ways to recuperate while still competing. Men, unable to shield their egos, do best in shorter competitions of a discrete length. Competitive fire is a consequence of both nature and nurture coming together. Typically, we tend to think of biological factors as determinative or permanent, but that, too, isn't so clear-cut. Often biology and psychology are in a war for control. When biology gets the upper hand, your mind can't turn the tide, and you are its victim, whipsawed by the effects of your body's response. But when people say that the difference between an elite competitor and an intermediate competitor is all mental, that's accurate. Becoming a better competitor is about controlling your psychological state, which in turn alters your underlying physiology. Most simply put, if you can control your fear, then you can control your biology too. Yet it's a myth that remaining calm is the answer for everyone. Only some people need to remain calm. Others conquer anxiety by going to the other end of the spectrum, by being highly aroused, animated, and even angry. A recurring note in this book is that there are two kinds of people: those who need to avoid stress to do well, and those who actually need stress to perform their best. Being told to chill out, relax, and think positively is fundamentally counterproductive for some people. What it takes to compete is not the same as what it takes to maintain well-being and to live a happy, contented life. To wade further into this book, one has to accept that the mental states, behaviors, and intensity of top competitors would be socially taboo if not for the competition. Notice, men don't pat each other on the butt after the game. But the rules of the game give them a pass. In fact, one could argue that it's only during competitions that we are socially permitted to try our absolute hardest, uncloak our desire to win, and be at our most intense. No wonder we like it so much. Chapter 2: The Competition Machine. If you go back to the first published research ever done in the field of social psychology, the year was 1898, and the author was a 37-year-old high school teacher named Norman Triplett, who had returned to Indiana University to pursue his master's degree. Triplett had an idea that competition somehow galvanizes a person's performance. The mere presence of another person doing the same task makes someone work harder. In the right circumstances, competition teases out people's best. Competition had always been at the cornerstone of political and economic theory. Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, Hobbes, Adam Smith. Just 40 years earlier, Darwin had suggested that competition was the engine of evolution. But Triplett was the first to measure its effect, rather than just theorize about it. Triplett's hobby was long-distance bicycling, at a time when cycling had captured the national imagination. Chain-driven bicycles with pneumatic tires had been invented, but the automobile was still a few years away. There was spectacular press coverage on every lowering of a cycling world record, over distances from 20 miles to 100 miles. Some cyclists attempted to go faster in an individual time trial by employing a series of pacers, usually skilled tandem teams that alternated, putting the trailing solo rider on a record pace. Other cyclists raced against competitors. Triplett pored over all the 1897 season data from the racing board of the League of American Wheelmen, trying to ascertain whether cyclists were faster racing against the clock or against other cyclists. He concluded that competition against other cyclists took off 5 seconds per mile compared to racing alone against the clock. He posited that the presence of another rider aroused competitive instinct, releasing or freeing nervous energy for him that he cannot of himself release. But it was still unclear if this speed increase could really be separated from the role of pacers and air-wind friction. Triplett designed an experiment to get to the meat of the issue. For his master's thesis, he wanted a unique task, something that no person could have practiced before. He built a metal contraption in his advisor's laboratory that he called the competition machine. The size of a rowing scull, the machine was an odd combination of 2 anchored reels at the end of long arms, a pulley, and a spindle loaded with a long reel of silk cord. Triplett recruited 225 subjects of all ages to run multiple trials on his machine. They did it sometimes alone, sometimes in competition with another person. At a signal, the stopwatch began, and each participant turned an arm-size reel as fast as possible, pulling the silk cord through a 16-meter-long path. Bright flags sewn to the cords indicated their progress. They would finish in around 150 turns of the reel. The whole thing would be over in approximately 40 seconds. While his summaries were recorded, much of Triplett's raw data is lost to history. The exception is the performances of 40 children. Each ran 6 trials over a number of days. He wrote about these kids in his 1898 paper listing every time trial. Most subjects were between 9 and 13 years old. Triplet had turned to children to answer several questions that intrigued him. Was competitive fire innate? Was there something special about competition that could help one child succeed while another crumbled? Did it matter how old the kids were? What about gender? Would there be differences in how girls and boys reacted to the race? All the children had a little practice with the competition machine, then did a time trial, pushing themselves to finish as fast as they possibly could. They were racing against the clock. Then, after a rest, 20 of them were matched up in 10 head-to-head competitions against another child who'd clocked a similar time. Several kids were considerably faster, and a few slower, and one much slower. No pattern immediately emerged. The second group of 20 kids did 2 time trials by themselves without competition. Just with the extra practice, they reduced their times on average by 2.5 seconds. At that point, they went head-to-head to see if competition further reduced their times. By the end, every child had 3 solo times against the clock and 3 times induced by competition. Looking across all 6 trials, a general finding began to emerge. Triplet concluded that competing head-to-head on average took a couple seconds off a child's time. He observed, the desire to beat, if it did nothing else, brought them to a sense of what was possible. But that wasn't the case across the board. For example, there were 2 girls both named Helen. One was Helen M., a 10-year-old girl. The other was Helen F., who was 9. Helen M.'s 3 solo times were all between 45 and 46 seconds. But head-to-head competition brought out significantly harder efforts in her. She was 5 to 10 seconds faster in each trial when competing head-to-head. One way to describe competitive fire is that it's being able to turn up the effort when challenged. Not just turn it up a little bit. Competitive fire is what you see when you dial the effort knob up to 11. Helen